tonight we have the pleasure of speaking with David Poses, who's the author of The Weight of Air. Just going to read a little about David. So as a writer, speaker, expert, and activist, David Poses is focused on evidence-based addiction treatment, drug policy, and harm reduction. His writing has been published by the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and New York Daily News, among others. He has appeared on various TV shows, radio programs, and podcasts. He is the author of The Weight of Air, a memoir of a double life fueled by addiction and mental illness. Depression was David's gateway to heroin, opioid addiction. He started using at 16 and kept his struggle hidden long after he got sober with buprenorphine at age 32. 10 years later, in 2018, he realized his silence was working against the changes he wanted to see in the world. How could he expect anyone else to talk openly about their addiction or mental health issues if he denied the existence of his? David set out on a mission to share his experiences with the world through his books, public speaking, and bylined articles for major media. David lives in New York with his wife and kids, and many instruments he can't really play, which I doubt. David, welcome to the Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Hi, everybody.
So why don't we just start, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into writing this book, what was your inspiration, what drew you here, which I know you write about a little bit in the book itself, but it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, writing has always kind of been, I guess I wouldn't call it passion. It's more of like a bodily urge. Words come out and then I feel better. So I always had some kind of writing project going on. And, I didn't talk about this stuff at all for the longest time. I mean, when I started writing this book, my family and friends believed I was 25 years sober. And I knew that my experience was, the norm, not the exception, and the kind of junkie stereotype wasn't real. And as the opioid crisis started occupying more, column inches and newspaper headlines, I felt like I had to do something. I had lost so many friends and people were dying, and I was so overwhelmed with guilt and shame for, deceiving my family for so long. And I believed that I could do some good by, just kind of talking about my experience and exposing the, disregard of science and evidence in treatment policy and prevention.
That's great. Yeah, and I mean, so you write about an approach that in the sort of substance use world, we'd often call like harm reduction, right? Yep. So maybe, I mean, you can, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about that, like what that approach means to you, how it might also differ from more traditional ways of treating drug and alcohol use, right? Historically, or thinking about kind of comparatively to abstinence-based models. So yeah, your thoughts on harm reduction.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, harm reduction, it's exactly how it sounds. It's reducing harm. And the idea is with drugs, we tend to have this attitude that when we find out somebody's on drugs, it's like, oh my God, you have to stop right now. Like you're going to die, you're killing your family, you're everything is, it's like an atomic bomb. And so the idea behind harm reduction is to reduce harm. Some people aren't ready to stop. Some people don't want to stop. Some people, the problem, we know that alcohol isn't a problem for something like 93%, I think, of people who drink, and drugs are the same. And yet, we assume that everything is the most acute situation and it's got to stop. So for a lot of people, it's really the laws and the stigma that increase the harm. I mean, if you can find, clean syringes is a form of harm reduction. Pharmaceutical drugs, a safe supply of drugs. Like there's all of these things out there that we can reduce harm without having to move to a total abstinence model. And we've also learned recently that abstinence treatment actually, dramatically increases the risk of overdose, relapse, and death. So, that whole model has been really, debunked empirically over the past couple of years. So there's that too.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So my own background's in, as we were talking about a little bit yesterday, in HIV. And so in that world of HIV prevention, things like syringe exchange, or I mean, even even sort of basic things like, you know, in the old days, like distributing like bleach kits, right? These sort of things that seemed, I think at the time, very controversial or very novel. And I'm glad to see that it's becoming somewhat more mainstream now. I mean, I don't think it's complete, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think the problem with it is that any of these things, like people tend to equate them with, oh, you're encouraging drug use. You know, I mean, I remember when I was in middle school in the 80s at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and there was a high school in New Jersey that was making condoms available to students. And they were saying, you know, oh, you're encouraging teen sex. And I remember watching this press conference, and the superintendent was saying, we are actively discouraging teen sex. However, you know, if in the unlikely event that 100% of our students don't listen to us, we would prefer that they don't die from AIDS. You know, and so we have this, you know, clean needles, like, oh my God, nobody starts using drugs because clean needles are available. Nobody stopped using drugs because clean needles aren't available. They slow the, you know, they will save your life. And so, you know, if clean needles led to drug use, I mean, anybody who works in a hospital would be, you know, an IV drug user right now. So it's like, if you can take a step back, I mean, I feel like our beliefs about drugs are, you know, fear is irrational, and it's based on this irrational fear. And if you can just take a step back for a minute, you know, I mean, something like safe injection sites, there's never been an overdose fatality in any of them anywhere in the world since the beginning of time. Like, that's pretty compelling evidence, right? And we have this idea that, like, oh my God, they're a bad thing. Like, there's nothing bad about that. But we feel like, oh, well, they're encouraging drug use. And it's just not true.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the only city that has, in the US at least, that has approved safe injecting sites was Philly, and they still haven't been able to actually operate even after having been approved. I think now it's been a couple years, and it's just been sort of stuck in these legal battles. So I think there's this this tension, right, between what municipalities or perhaps even states are willing to do, and the sort of federal policy around these issues, right? And I appreciated what you were saying too about, you know, the sort of myth that just mentioning the topic, you know, or having accessible condoms or clean needles is going to increase the behavior. That used to also be said a lot, or it's another myth sort of around suicidality, right? Like the idea, like if you bring up the topic of suicide, that you're somehow potentially increasing the likelihood of somebody committing or thinking about suicidal ideation. And that's just not true, right? We have all this research that says just the opposite, that if you have these thoughts, like, they're going to be there regardless, and like bringing up the question doesn't elicit the thought, right? So it's just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of repeating what I said before, that we react to these things with this irrational fear that all of this is going to lead to drug use, and it's just not, it's simply not true.
Yeah.
And we have the same thoughts with, you know, the people that are against safe injection sites, they're against harm reduction, they're against methadone clinics, like, they're against all of these things, you know, and legalizing and regulating drugs, like all of these, the safe injection sites and the clinics and all of these things are, you know, for lack of a better term, like almost a consolation prize, because the drugs have been made so unsafe because of, you know, these prohibitionist drug policy, punitive drug policy.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, let's jump into that. So just want to kind of review some of the changes that have happened through the pandemic with opioid overdoses, right? So we know there's been this huge like uptick in overdoses in the past couple of years. So prior to the pandemic, it was something like 50,000 deaths a year, right? And for the period ending March 2021, so that 12-month period, it's somewhere between like 97 to 100,000. Right? So this really just gargantuan leap, right? And it's an increase in about 30%. the actual numbers might actually be higher. They're still tabulating that data, right? So what do you think's driving this? Like, what are we getting wrong? What has the pandemic heightened that already was a problem?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental problem is the overwhelming majority of overdoses are caused by illicit drugs, right? And so when you take a step back and you look at what's going on here, overdose is an overly potent dose, right? So with illicit drugs, you don't know, there's no, potency is unknown, it's inconsistent, it's an unregulated market, so you have no idea what you're getting. If you go to the liquor store and you buy a bottle of vodka, it's whatever the proof is, it's consistent every time. You're not going to find out that it's methanol, later, or it's got poison in it. And so the problem with illicit drugs is, when I was an IV heroin user, I could basically, I would shoot a bag of dope, right? And it was fairly consistent. I mean, I never overdosed, and I was very lucky, and I thought I was being so careful. But if I was shooting a bag of dope at a time, and I bought it from a different dealer, and there's no quality assurance statement on the bag. It's an archaic stamp. There's no 800 number to call. So if this bag was 20 times more potent than that bag, I'm dead. And it's like those cans of hard seltzer that you see that seem to be manufactured for teenagers. They're like 3% alcohol or whatever. So one of those cans, if you filled that with grain alcohol, it would be like 33 cans of hard seltzer proof. And so, everybody understands, like, well, gee whiz, it's very safe to know that, what you're getting when you open that can. People would be dying left and right if they were drinking 33 cans of, hard seltzer in one go. And so that's why people are dying. The drugs that are killing people are the illegal drugs. And so the restrictions that we've placed on the DEA keeps placing more and more restrictions on the prescription opioids. They're harder and harder to get. And so, people have been using drugs longer than written language. Laws don't stop people from using drugs. Laws don't stop people from breaking the speed limit or murdering somebody. Like, if you're going to do something, nobody's going like, oh my God, murder's illegal. I really want to kill that guy, but I'm not going to. So people are using drugs. These restrictions are driving people to the illicit markets. And fentanyl, these fentanyl analogs, like fentanyl is kind of like a catch-all phrase. Pharmaceutical fentanyl is completely different than these analogs that are out on the street, and nobody's studying them. There's who knows how many varieties of them with different kinds of potencies, and you just you don't know what you're getting. But so people, if they were able to go out and get consistent drugs, it would be, very, very different. So these counterfeit pills are a huge problem right now. Like the DEA just put out this thing a couple of weeks ago, this, one pill can kill. And they themselves are saying, counterfeit pills have never been, they're everywhere. There's never been this much of a problem. They've never been more potent and deadly. And so, gee whiz, guys, what a coincidence that this flood of counterfeit pills sprang up, right around the time that, these restrictions have never been tighter. And so they say in this campaign, the only safe pills are dispensed from pharmacies, but they won't give you those pills. So, it's like, and when you ask somebody these questions, like, should we legalize and regulate drugs? It's safer. What people hear is, do you want more people to use drugs? And what the question really, what people need to be hearing is, do you want less people to die from drugs? Because that's what's going on here. And again, it's another one of these myths where, like, if legalization led to widespread use, I live in New York. Beer is, at gas station. Like, I don't load up on booze every time there's an opportunity to buy beer. And when you have a conversation with somebody and you ask them that, they're like, well, neither do I, but I'm a bad example. Okay, so then would you start using meth if meth was legal? No, absolutely not. Well, surely lots of people who would, no. So, like, nobody actually knows anybody who would start using drugs if they were legal. Like, like, everybody can debunk these myths on their own if they just, approach them with a little bit of logic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this fear tactic, it's sold, right, in kind of drug use prevention programs, and completely ineffective, right? It's been studied a lot. I've been hearing lately a lot of reports, again, these is a sort of scare tactic of being like, your marijuana might be laced with fentanyl, you know, your
yeah.
cocaine laced with fentanyl.
That's actually, I'm sorry, the cocaine and the fentanyl is actually true, but I'm sorry, the fentanyl exposure myth. I mean, that happened. It comes up a lot, and over the summer there was, the San Diego cop that they were saying he's overdosing.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So fentanyl, it's easy to believe these myths because we're terrified of fentanyl. We know it's very powerful and it's killing people. Fentanyl exposure is not toxic. I mean, you could take a bath in a giant bathtub full of fentanyl. Nothing is going to happen to you. You can breathe it in. I mean, and it's like, we know, everybody's seen the footage of like, cops in warehouses full of cocaine. And like, if no other drug does that to you, why is it that this drug, would? And it so happens that like these guys are, it's a taxpayer funded program. They need maximum fear in order to, get their $48 billion a year that they fight the war on drugs with. So it certainly makes sense to go out and make this stuff up. The fentanyl and cocaine is true, and people are dying right now because there's, basically whatever you buy, anything illicit, again, you don't know what you're getting, and they're putting fentanyl on everything right now.
Yeah. So let me go back to a topic you were starting to talk about, the sort of availability of prescription opioids, right? So wanting to be able to get on methadone or buprenorphine or Suboxone, one of the variants of that. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the ways in which that's changed again during the pandemic. Like, has it become some things appear to be easier, right? So maybe tell us a little bit about that and what you think about where it's going.
Okay, I mean, I guess you have to kind of take a step back and look at where it was, which is, buprenorphine has been around since, for a while, not as long as methadone, but it's a partial opiate agonist, so it's, infinitely safer than anything else. And the question of like, well, what's a full agonist? It's basically anything other than buprenorphine, right? So like methadone, heroin, fentanyl, morphine, Percocet, like you name it, it's a full agonist. So it's so much safer. However, any doctor can prescribe any full agonist, any legal, full agonist. You need a special X waiver to prescribe buprenorphine, which 7% of US physicians have, right? So any doctor can prescribe opioids that will kill you, no problem. However, just 7% have the antidote, which is, obviously backwards. And so there's a limit to how many patients they can treat at any given moment. When the Drug Act passed in 1999-2000, it was 125. The Obama administration raised it to, I think, 225 maybe, and that, that's where it's been since. So during the pandemic, there was talk about buprenorphine being available by telehealth, right? So it was for the longest, it's so restricted that like you need, the prescription and the whole thing. So they changed it during the pandemic so that doctors could treat you via telehealth, like, right now, if you were a doctor, you could do it. And so that was actually a huge deal.
Without the positive like Detox that used to be required to get started. Yeah.
It's a huge deal that you don't need to see a doctor in person, that you can you can do it by phone or whatever, because if 7% of US physicians are licensed to prescribe buprenorphine, where are these doctors? Like if 60% of US counties don't have a single licensed buprenorphine doctor. And all of these rural places that are so hard hit, like you're dead. I mean, there's no, what are you going to do? And so Oasis relaxed guidelines for methadone during the pandemic as well. It used to, getting take-home doses of methadone is practically impossible. And if the idea of methadone is, we want to get you back to normal, like there's absolutely nothing normal about going to a methadone clinic every morning before you start your day. And for most people, it's just not possible. And to that end, you can get any drugs delivered to your house in under 24 hours. So the idea that, somebody's going to go to, why is anybody going to do that? So they made them easier to get methadone and buprenorphine. The take-home doses were happening with methadone, and that was great. And then as COVID cases started, dropping, these are all kind of at the discretion of doctors and clinics. And so things started to change. And lately, I call I don't know, like anywhere from, half a dozen to, 20 methadone clinics all over the country every few months just to kind of see what's going on. And I've signed up for wait lists at a bunch of clinics. I'm on a couple of wait lists right now that I've been on. The longest one I've been on is 16 months. I mean, like, that's insane.
Just like as an experiment to see.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm on buprenorphine. So I call and I say, like, I'd like to get on methadone. Like, I think it's really important, whatever. Like, I'm genuinely trying. So there, the barriers to access, they made it easier to get, but the fact is there's just not enough. That doesn't mean that you can get it.
Right.
And at the end of the day, like, if the drugs that are killing people are that much more accessible, the poison is easier to find than the antidote, and that's not a recipe for success. So as far as where I think we're going, I mean, I don't think that I could do what I'm doing if I didn't think that the methadone restrictions were going to change, because that to me is just unconscionable. Methadone is in pharmacies right now, right? So like if your doctor wrote you a prescription for, you had like knee surgery and I think methadone is the right thing for you, he can write a prescription for methadone, she can write a prescription for methadone, you can go to the pharmacy, you can fill it, 30-day supply, no problem, you've got all the methadone in your house, right? Doctor wants to write me a prescription for methadone to treat addiction, I've got to go to the clinic every day. The exact same methadone doesn't know that, what we're using it for, or, whether, I mean, it's so that would be so simple. And methadone and buprenorphine are, they're proven to reduce the risk of overdose, relapse, and death by up to 79%, whereas we know that fentanyl kills. Faith and abstinence programs have a better chance of killing you. So the idea that like we're making these things practically impossible to get, it doesn't make sense. So I really want to believe that the methadone laws are going to change. I mean, this antiquated model of like, it's more dangerous. It's so dangerous. So you have to come in and dose every day. That makes sense in a vacuum when the alternative is nothing. Methadone is more dangerous than nothing, of course. Methadone is not more dangerous than toxic illicit fentanyl that's killing 240 people every day, 100,000 people a year, right? So, it all happens in that context. And when people say like, well, yeah, but these clinics, like they have to, they don't want to, somebody could overdose, you have to get them stable, whatever. That's all true. And they can do that. But the people that they're treating are the people who are using these, illicit drugs and managing to not die long enough to get to the clinic in the first place. So, there's a little bit of knowledge there. And the idea of like, well, we can't trust them because the junkies are liars and we make them pee in a cup and all that kind of stuff. Look, there have been tons of studies about diverted methadone, diverted buprenorphine, and a lot of buprenorphine places are making you come in every day also, like to mimic the methadone model, which is just absolutely ludicrous. Nobody is abusing these medications, right? If you want to get high on some kind of opioid and you go to a drug dealer and the guy's like, I've got methadone, I've got buprenorphine, and I've got heroin, what are you going to buy? I mean, really, so nobody, I mean, it's like a ridiculously negligible number of people who are, partying on, I mean, nobody is. And also, if it would be illegal, if I gave you buprenorphine, it's, we're both committing a crime and it's legal. However, if you're on illicit fentanyl and I give you buprenorphine, that's safer, obviously, than the fentanyl. So the idea, like, we should be flooding the streets with this stuff. The idea that it's so restricted and we don't want it to get out there. Like, we're worried that you're going to sell your methadone. Fine, do it, give it away. I mean, Jesus, like, what are we trying? If we wanted to save lives, like, it's like we're trying to prevent more people from using drugs because of this myth of, it's going to lead to more drug use instead of preventing overdoses.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about a lot of things. I mean, they stopped doing it, but during a good chunk of the pandemic, New York City was home delivering methadone for a while, and things like that. Sorry,
I thought they were still doing that in some places. No,
I'm not sure. I've heard that some places have stopped. Maybe some places still are. So I don't know if it's across the board, but so maybe there's some variation in it. But that was I think a huge improvement, right? Because I think what you were bringing up about, having to go to dose every morning, right? There is really a sort of strategic public shaming aspect to that, right? Like, yes. make you feel really guilty about the fact that, damn, you need this every day. And I'm going to remind you that you have to come here and stand in this line and, be somewhat publicly ridiculed, right? So it brings up for me, I worked at San Francisco General for a long time. Ward 93 was the methadone clinic, and working on the HIV ward, we collaborated a lot. And it was just, the take home things, I mean, you can kind of earn up to having take homes, right? But you only get so many take homes.
You earn them by being trustworthy, because we don't believe that you actually want to get well.
Right. There's a real lack of trust. So yeah, I think there's this element of the shame that I feel like folks may not want to, as a society, be as easy to give up, because there's somewhat of a, I mean, it's twisted in a way, but
you're absolutely right. I mean, and think about, like, for me, when I was hiding, right, I would have loved to have gotten on methadone. I mean, that would have been the best thing. It would have saved 10 years of struggle if I could have gotten on methadone. I couldn't have gone to a clinic every day. I wasn't going to tell my family, or I couldn't bring myself to, admit what was going on. So the idea, like, if I could just get a prescription, I was able to hide buprenorphine for 10 years because it was just a prescription. So there's no privacy also with that public shaming. So even if you're okay with it, and there's, just a practicality piece of it, like, I think about a single parent, right, who, or somebody who can't go to work late, or, like, there's logistical reasons that you just can't do it. And, I use that stuff when I call clinics. I mean, I can really only pull it off in New York because I don't know the geography in, other states. But I'll say, like, look, I live an hour and a half from your clinic. How am I going to go there every day? Like, I just can't do it. But I'm going to die. Like, do you want my blood on your hands? And they're like, well, sorry, man, if you want to get clean, then, you'll come in. And it's like, it's not that I don't want to get clean. It's that I can't spend 4 hours every day driving to and from your clinic. My kids would never go to school and I wouldn't be able to work. Otherwise, it's perfect.
Let me just dip into the Q&A, because I'm going to try to keep up with it. So we have a question. It seems like addiction recovery takes on a survival of the fittest perspective, much like poverty has historically. But why? So I mean, I guess just your thoughts on, we've sort of touched on this already, but the different types of models for recovery, or for, perhaps even just reduced substance use, if that's what it is. And do you feel like, I feel like, at least for myself, like, since working in this field, over the past couple of decades, it seems like there is much more of a shift in this direction. Particularly, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how many of the drug laws, at least locally, are beginning to change, right? So kind of the lowest rung of that being where a city may just decide not to prosecute on drug offenses, particularly for, like, possession or possession, basically. So Baltimore has done this, right, where they haven't really changed the law, but they're just saying that the DA is not going to prosecute for these felonies, right? Then, like, another level where we might say, okay, we're actually decriminalizing this, so it's legally off the books, that this is not even in the state's code anymore, right? And that's happening mostly at a very local level, right? It's like Denver, Oakland. I looked this up. Oregon, the entire state, right? The only state, right, that has done that. DC, Cambridge. So there's a few cities.
It's different drugs also. I mean, like, DC psilocybin mushrooms are,
right,
decriminalized, but you're going to get arrested if you get caught with, meth, for instance.
Yeah. So that's important to note, that it's not necessarily across the board for all substances, right? And internationally, right, there's a few places where we have the same complete decriminalization policy. Countries, Netherlands, Portugal, Switzerland, right? So the third option being all the way to legalization, right? or it's not even that it's just not a crime, but it's actually fully legal to use, which I think really has only happened in our country around marijuana, right? So some thoughts, or not even completely, right? Because there's still a tension between the federal policy. But yeah, so your thoughts on these different avenues, right, to approaching enforcement?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important to be aware of the difference between decriminalization and legalization and regulation, right? So decriminalization ends criminal penalties. It's the same drugs, you got the same overdose risk, like nothing changes except you're not going to get arrested when you're, holding the drugs. And this is when you're not going to overdose, is when you're holding the drugs. It's when you're buying them and you don't know what you're getting, and then you're using them and you don't know how much, to put in your body. Like that's when you're going to die. So certainly there's been, I mean, obviously the war on drugs has been, just like a ridiculous failure in so many different ways, and it's destroyed so many lives and killed so many people. So the idea of getting rid of the criminal penalties is obviously very important, and I feel like it's a step process. Like it seems unlikely that the government is going to say, look, we're just going to legalize and regulate everything, but that really is what we should do. I mean, we learned, during Prohibition, when alcohol was illegal, overdose fatalities surged because, for the very same reasons that people are dying of, fentanyl overdose every day right now. I mean, people were fermenting, anything organic can be fermented. So people were, boiling down their wooden furniture and making booze out of it. And you don't know what, it's the same problem. You don't know what you're getting. So in terms of legalizing and regulating, like anybody who actually understands this stuff there's no argument that it's not safer. Like it's clearly safer. I mean, pharmaceutical drugs, you can overdose on OxyContin, definitely, but that's not what's killing the vast majority of people. We think that because we see these headlines and we see about Purdue Pharma. That's not actually what's going on here. And that's very important to be aware of. It is safer to take OxyContin than a bag of heroin on the street because it says 80 milligrams of OxyContin on it. You know exactly what you're getting. And so it's the difference between, I've got 2 pint glasses on the table, and if you don't know what's in them, and one of them is methanol and one of them is hard seltzer, it's a very serious problem. If you've got a drink one of them, it's obviously safer to know, to know what's in them. And so it seems like if we, what we have right now is just completely antithetical to public health and safety. Like if we wanted to save lives and we wanted to make things as safe as possible, it would be, everything would be legal and regulated. And I think when people think about legalization, the regulation part, I think, kind of goes missing. And it's the difference between, look, like you go to the farmer's market and you buy some cheese, and yeah, it's legal, but it's not regulated. Like somebody just made it, in their house. And certainly you have recourse if you die from this, toxic cheese or whatever. And, it's very unlikely, but like, it's different than buying cheese in the supermarket that has been through, the whatever the regulatory process and so forth. And especially with drugs where it's anonymous and it's an illicit market. And like, what are you going to do? Like you'd go back to the farmer's market and be like, hey, I got really sick from eating your cheese. And they'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like something would happen. You go up to a drug dealer and say like, hello, my friend died. And they're like, well, here's the number for the cartel down in, Sinaloa. Like, it's not realistic. So the entire approach is just not, it's not friendly at all. I mean, it's just, it couldn't be, and also punish, like the idea of punishment. I mean, again, with the criminal penalties. So in the places that have decriminalized, Portugal saw a dramatic drop in HIV/AIDS when they decriminalized because, having clean needles, obviously, like, I mean, I don't know why anybody's surprised by this data. Overdose fatalities have been going up in Portugal lately. And a lot of people are saying, aha, see, it doesn't work. Meanwhile, 20 years of like drops. But now, obviously it's a failure. And that's happening because, again, the drugs are the same. We have to replace the drug. It's the drugs that are killing people. The overdose crisis right now, all these people that are dying every day, nobody's going up to drug dealers and saying like, I would like to buy the stuff, like, please sell me the most potent stuff, but don't tell me what it is.
No one wants to overdose. Yeah.
And drug dealers, like this myth that, they're these predatory, bloodthirsty monsters, like, any halfway intelligent person knows that a dead customer is not good for repeat business.
Right.
so if it was legal and regulated, you'd know what you're putting in your body. Accidental means preventable. How are you going to prevent an overly potent dose if you don't know how potent the dose is? And so when I don't want to say, when you know what you're doing, because, nobody really does, but look, I don't drink alcohol, so I have very limited experience, but I imagine that somebody who has a couple of glasses of wine every night at dinner, they know what they're doing, right? So if all of a sudden there was no way to know what was in the wine, and maybe it's methanol and whatever, that inconsistency is dangerous. And it's unquestionably safer like this. And that's the difference. So if we wanted to say, look, all of the legally regulated drugs, like these medications are in pharmacies right now. We could make Dilaudid available. Nobody would be buying illicit fentanyl if you could just walk into a pharmacy. And the model already exists. Like people, I have this conversation with people and they're like, well, how would we possibly do it? It's like, have you ever been to a liquor store? Because that's exactly what it's like. You take drugs, you package them and you sell them like alcohol. We're spending $48 billion a year on the war on drugs right now. We're spending 12 times more on interdiction than treatment. If we were to end the war on drugs, package, sell and tax drugs like alcohol, the $48 billion cash burn is $106 billion positive net swing. That is plenty of money for treatment. It's plenty of money for all kinds of safety programs. It's plenty of money to replace the Just Say No program and have something more realistic that's, based in harm reduction. It's like, so the people who are against these, well, drugs are dangerous, so they shouldn't be legal. You have to really just be either very, very ignorant or full of hate in order to, and not want, and want to spend more money on taxes. Everybody that we're sick of paying for these programs, it's like, fine, you don't want to pay for these programs? Here's a positive net swing, take this money. It's just ignorance that's blocking this.
Yeah, and I'm glad you also brought up alcohol, because I think there is such a difference between how alcohol consumption or alcohol addiction is viewed, right? Even the way that we talk about substances, it's always alcohol and other drugs. It's always given a special status, right? Or drug and alcohol, right? As if it's not a drug, right? So part of that, I think, maybe. Say again?
Alcohol is the most dangerous, most addictive substance you can put in your body. It will shut down every organ in your body. All other drugs combined can't do that. It can kill you in withdrawal. No other substance is that addictive. And it can kill you in an overdose. So, alcohol is empirically worse for you in every which way. We think alcohol is safe because it's legal. Alcohol is
right. Exactly.
Alcohol is safer, or we think alcohol is safe because it's legal. Alcohol is it's safer because it's legal. Sorry, I get my line.
Yeah, no. I'm completely with you. And I think that's absolutely right. Even in treatment, right? Or in 12-step groups, again, it's always bracketed off. And maybe that's also just the history of how 12-step has functioned, and starting with AA, maybe giving it a unique status in that way. But you hear that in the rooms, right? You'll hear people say things like, keep it in the bottle, let's talk about.
It's funny because we know that each type of substance affects our neural pathways differently. You don't have to have used cocaine and pot to know that they're different. But we grow up in this culture of a drug is a drug is a drug, and everything's lumped together as recreational drugs. They're all completely different substances, and we lose sight of that along the way.
So along the same topic, there's a question in the Q&A around how do you feel about the difficulty to get prescribed buprenorphine without naloxone, Subutex, as opposed to Suboxone?
That's a great question. Hi, Sally. The trouble with that question is what's going on right now with precipitated withdrawal, which I guess to avoid going down the rabbit hole of the challenges of buprenorphine inductions, the difference between Subutex and Suboxone is naloxone. So Suboxone has Narcan in it, basically. And the Narcan in Suboxone is only active if it hits your bloodstream. But there's this fear that I'm going to get sick and have precipitated withdrawal. If I'm trying to get on buprenorphine, it's got the Narcan in it, it's going to make me sick. That is not true. If you take buprenorphine, if you take Suboxone as it's directed, it dissolves under your tongue, or you crush it up and snort it, or you stick it in your ass. As long as you don't inject it into a vein, the Narcan isn't gonna cause any problems. So, I mean, Sally, as far as the difficulty, I feel like the question is like, doesn't that suck? And I agree with you, it totally does. I mean, I don't think that Suboxone needs to exist at all. I think it should all be Subutex. However, the flip side of that is it's actually not a problem. Like, I feel like it's the mistrust and it's all of these stereotypes and stigmas that, I mean, you know, we know that that's why it was developed. Like the FDA told, you know, Reckitt Drugs that, hey, look, if you guys want to sell this in the United States, you got to make it, you know, completely abuse proof and do all this stuff to it. So the fact is, it doesn't actually. Suboxone is a you know, problem looking for a solution or whatever. So yeah, I mean, Subutex should be available. However, it does give people a false sense of like, oh, it's totally safe. I can take this on top of fentanyl, which is lipophilic, and you're still going to have precipitated withdrawal. So that's important.
Thank you. That's good. There's a lot of buprenorphine questions, so I'm going to just stick with this sort of theme on bupes, right? I know. Like,
yeah, I wasn't looking. Hi, everybody.
Right. People are here. This is great. Is there a typical time frame for buprenorphine treatment? Is inpatient recommended to get completely off of Suboxone?
Sorry, I want to address that. No.
Do you want to say something else?
What?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, Georgia. There is not a typical time frame. I've been on buprenorphine since 2008. I have no intention of coming off. I know that I need it. I know that I need it. And you have to think of it like, you know, if we were talking about diabetes and insulin, nobody would be saying like, well, clearly your diabetes is in check here. When are you going to stop taking that life-saving insulin? I mean, you know, we just don't think of it that way. It's the abstinence-based culture. So the answer is there's no time frame, and it's whenever anybody's ready. And we've got to get away from this, you know, culture of shaming people out of it. I mean, you know, I have the same problem. Like I was on it for 10 years, and I had a buprenorphine doctor who was saying like, you've been on this stuff for 10 years. You don't need it anymore. You got to get off it. And I was like, oh my God, you know, maybe I should do that. And I kind of went with it. And then I felt like, what am I out of my mind? Like this stuff is good for, like, this is good for me. Why would I not take this? It's keeping me alive. So, you know, but you hear stories. I mean, it's awful. Like I hear from parents, you know, almost on a daily basis. And I don't know exactly how many. I've lost count at this point. I mean, not every day I hear this story, but I couldn't tell you how many parents I hear from where, you know, the kid wanted to get on buprenorphine, and the parents talk to some abstinence-based, you know, these medical experts that have no medical qualifications that are saying like, oh, it's an extension of your kid's addiction, and they're lying, and this is what they do, and you know, blah blah blah.
Right, right.
You know, and then you know they get on it, and then they forcibly, you know, you can be on it for a week or whatever it is, and then they've got no tolerance. They go out and buy the illicit drugs that you don't know what you're putting in your body. That's the highest possible overdose risk, and they're dead. And you know, it's like think of it as an insurance policy, if nothing else. Why would I not want to take it? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it also reminds me of just seeing so many folks when they've tried to, especially taper off like the last milligram of being on methadone. Like it's painful to witness, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, the thing about it is, you know, the idea that like sobriety gets easier with time is true with everything else. Opioid, you know, unlike any other substance or vice, opioids are the only thing that has a natural target in your brain, and they take hold with this ferocity that's unlike anything else. And so, you know, whether your use is legal or illicit, and whether you have a prescription or not, and whether you got it because you had knee surgery, like it doesn't matter. Every dose of opioids multiplies your opiate receptors. And there's all the studies about, you know, the neurotransmitters, the way that they rewire, and the neuroplasticity in the brain. It doesn't necessarily reverse itself with time. And these are studies of like, you know, decades, 50 years of abstinence with people. And, you know, you'd think that it would be like the guys that are, you know, oh, nobody was more fucked up than me. Like, that's not what it is. It's not the like, might have this crazy tolerance, you know, whatever. It's everybody's brain chemistry is different. Everybody's body chemistry is different. And so, you know, like however many opiate receptors I had when I was 15, I've got 1 trillion more of them now. And so they need to be saturated. Like depression is a degenerative biological condition. And that's why I started using heroin. So the idea that I'm going to be like feeling spectacular when my, you know, fields and fields of receptors are completely unsaturated after they've been used to, like, why would I want to do that? Like that, we have this sobriety, sobriety is kind of the end all be all, but like sobriety is the answer to, like addiction is almost this kind of another catch-all phrase where I feel like everybody has a different definition, right? I mean, we know that it's compulsive use despite negative consequences, but there's
definitely different ideas about what sobriety is, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's addiction, the physical, medical condition of like, I drink alcohol every day for a year, and then I wake up one morning and I don't drink, I'm going to get sick. I am addicted to alcohol, right? And then there's the like, I'm drinking to drown my sorrows, and I'm going to be really, really, depressed if I stop drinking, right? So if, take that example. You go through alcohol detox. I don't know how long it takes. I mean, I got drunk once in my life. So, whatever, it's a week. Let's say all the booze is out of your system, right? You are sober. Sobriety has ended your addiction to alcohol. However, the compulsive use despite negative consequences, right? Like think of like obsessive compulsive disorder. Somebody who, I gotta turn the doorknob, 38 times or else my, grandmother's cat's gonna die. I stopped turning the doorknob. I'm sober. I have abstained. My compulsion to turn the doorknob is, over. However, I still think grandma's cat is gonna die and I wanna turn the doorknob. So it's like we're pushing a cure for a medical condition that does nothing for, compulsive behavior is a mental health disorder. It's not, it's like, well, try this on this. Like, of course it's not going to work. Like, and like, that's why sobriety isn't easy, because it solves the wrong problem. Like nobody's problem is, I can't stop pouring booze down my throat. I'm drinking to drown my sorrows, and it's like, we've got to be treating the wounds. And with so many of these abstinence programs, I mean, I was told explicitly that depression's an excuse, I'm making excuses and whatever. It's like, treat the underlying pain. Like it's, that model of like, it's bad people who use drugs, like people who are in pain are using painkillers. Treat the pain. If you don't treat the pain, like what, how is anybody going to get better? How sobriety is going to make their life better? Like if somebody's foot got chopped off, nobody in their right mind would be like, oh, you're only going to feel better when you stop taking the morphine. The morphine is the reason that your foot got chopped off. Like it's crazy.
That's a great example. I mean, not to knock it. Sobriety works for some. That's there. 12-step works for some.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to knock it. Yeah, no.
Yeah, which I know you're on point with. Let me just keep on checking. So we've got this kind of a switching of topics. Do you think there's something we can learn from the support and accessibility of PrEP or pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV and apply it to increasing support and accessibility for MAT or medication-assisted treatment for substance abuse? Do you see that one? It's Eliza.
Do you think there's something we can learn from this point?
I jumped down. It's right after Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. Sorry, I'm not so well versed that I would be able to.
Really... Okay, I can jump in here. So PrEP is basically this like once a day oral medication. It typically was Truvada in the past. Now there's a couple of different medications you can take. They're basically.
It's not a controlled substance though, right?
No, it's not a controlled substance. Right. It's an antiretroviral medication. So it's an HIV med. And so you take it every day, kind of like a prophylactic, like how you might take an antibiotic every day to prevent, let's say, pneumonia or something, right? So I think the question is asking about the pretty, at this point in the dissemination of PrEP, it's, I would say for the most part, relatively easy to get. I mean, there's some variation on that, depending on the state you're in. But is there an analogy to be made between that and MAT? I want to say yes, it should be exactly the same, but realistically, we're talking about controlled substances. MAT is methadone and buprenorphine, and the DEA would have to make them in the same category as PrEP. So PrEP, nobody's worried that people are taking that and getting high and abusing it and whatever. And therein lies the rub with the medically assisted treatment. But I mean, if it were up to me, like yes, it would be everywhere. Sorry. Yeah. No, that's great. Okay, so I'm gonna jump down. This is a very precise question. I'm jumping down to Brandon, who
Okay.
asked, in chapter 3 of your book, you wrote about staying clean for a week before going to Hazleton for the first time. What allowed for this to happen, and what did you do to maintain that attitude until you left? Does listening to Radiohead, I was going to ask you about Radiohead, but that's fine. We can talk about Radiohead now. Does listening to Radiohead now ruminate negative feelings about when you were using, or can you enjoy it and not be reminded of the past? And last, if you had to choose between one Radiohead album, what would it be? OK Computer or Kid A? Oh, I know the answer for me, but go ahead.
Oh my God, Brandon, you just reminded me that the Kid A Amnesiac, I think, came out this week. Oh my God, this is
Right.
very serendipitous. Yeah. Sorry, I gotta write this down.
It's all related.
Thank you, Brandon. Okay, so right, being home for a week. I mean, basically, I ended up, I did a lot of stuff with my mom. I was not really in my right mind. It's like I was hopeful, but not very optimistic. I guess like I wasn't feeling right, it's not like the dope leaves your system and everything and your brain just goes back to normal. So I was in a little bit of I don't know yeah, I mean, you're asking what did I do to maintain that attitude? Like I don't think that I had any attitude that I had at any given moment was maintained from moment to moment. I hope that makes sense. Does listening to Radiohead, I will tell you that OK Computer is still my favorite album of all time. I listen to it now just as much as I did when the OK Not OK Computer came out a couple of years ago. I've been listening to that. I mean, I can't get enough Radiohead. And Kid A, I mean, it's funny, like Kid A had its 21st birthday on October 3rd. And I remember the day it came out, I dragged Andrea to Tower Records, and we, sat on this hill, like we could see the Twin Towers, and we were listening to Kid A, and it was very strange because, it was not what I was expecting. And I mean, I totally fell in love with it, but like, I feel like Kid A kind of evolves in like I fell so in love with OK Computer, like from the minute, and it's definitely a very rich album, and you hear things, every time. But like, I feel like I'm still kind of picking up pieces of Kid A. I think I would pick OK Computer. Like if I had to pick one, if I had to pick one to the exclusion of the other one, like I could never listen to the other again. I don't think I could live without OK Computer. But that's a really tough. I mean, I'd love to know what you think of that. Can somebody like write back?
I think they can ask it as another question if you want to, Brandon.
Yeah, Brandon, tell me what you think about that. And if you've heard this Kid A Amnesiac, I'd love to know what you think. Surely you're aware of it. Sorry. All right.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, it kind of stole my thunder for asking you about Radiohead as well. I was going to say, Subterranean Homesick Alien is one of my favorite songs.
Can I tell you something crazy about OK Computer that I learned?
Yeah, please.
Not long ago? Do you know the cover of OK Computer, that like highway picture? Do you know where that highway is?
No, I'm sure you could do some funky like Reddit search to figure that out.
It is the junction of I-84 and I-91 outside of Hartford, Connecticut.
Wow.
And I didn't know that until not too long ago, but like I was on that road driving back to college.
Yeah, you wrote about living in Connecticut.
I mean,
so crazy. Yeah. So there's all this like personal sentimentality to it. I mean, there's an interesting thing about music, right? Which I think is part of what Brandon was bringing up, the way in which music or, food, particular images even like can really connect you to a particular experience or moment in time or person you were with, whatever. So, I mean, to just jump back to his question, like, do you have, are there some negative associations from things that you may have experienced while listening to this stuff? Maybe not necessarily to Radiohead per se, but like music at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's like anything else for anybody else. Like there's some songs that you associate with something good, and then something bad happens while you're listening to them. I can't think of, actually that's not true. Exit music for a film sometimes reminds me of one thing that but I think I've listened to every song in so many different situations that I have nothing but good, I guess, or the good outweighs the bad. But I was thinking about also the idea of like when they took the music away from me in rehab, and they were like, oh, music is a trigger and all that. Like, pain is the trigger. It's not the music. So, but yeah, I mean, everybody has those sad songs. I mean, there's I'm like I don't think that there's a whole lot of like Van Morrison in my book, but I get very weepy when I listen to Astral Weeks these days. So yeah.
Okay, that's really fascinating. I'm gonna jump a little bit further down. Might be a dumb question. It's not a dumb question. This is a good question. Methadone and buprenorphine covered by health insurance. So maybe you could speak to that, or also like the differential access depending on health insurance.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of health insurance companies. I was paying for buprenorphine out of pocket for a very long time, and I still pay for my buprenorphine doctor out of pocket because my insurance company says that addiction is not a life-threatening medical condition. Which, okay, so I feel like this is the leading cause of death in the United States right now, and the idea that it wouldn't be covered by health insurance is like it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy, and I know so many parents who tried to get a kid into rehab, and the insurance company said no. I had situations with buprenorphine where we've had a couple of different insurance companies over the years that I've been on buprenorphine, and I feel like it was Blue Cross Blue Shield told me at some point that they're comfortable giving me 12 milligrams of buprenorphine a month, right? And at the time I was on 20 milligrams a day, and I was like, so how do you propose that I do that? And they're like, well, see, here's the thing. Like, you're telling us, you're like jumping up and down that we're not, giving you what you need or whatever. We're telling you that we're giving you, this is what we're willing to do. And it's like, so a lot of insurance companies will come up with that kind of concession that really just feels like a colossal fuck you, like, oh yeah, we're not saying no, we'll give you 12 milligrams. It's like, what do you, that's totally so. Yeah, I don't think it's a dumb question at all. I think it's outrageous that any health insurance company wouldn't do that. These are medications. I mean, like for any of these questions, I think if you cross out addiction and drug use and you swap any medical, put any medical condition in parentheses, if it is completely fucking preposterous, that's the answer.
So this is a little bit of a switch. This is going back to the topic around decriminalization. I'm looking at Casey Dean's question, by the way. So observing that this seems to be the same argument as the pro-choice movement, yet the pro-choice movement seems to be more mainstream, while access to abortion has seen attempts to limit access in states like Texas and Mississippi. Can you speak to a scenario where illicit drugs were legalized for regulation, but would go through that similar situation of limiting access? How could harm reduction activists be best prepared to challenge those attempts? That's a great question.
Okay, that is a great question. And I think it really is very similar. I mean, it's a question of, reducing harm. Like if abortion is illegal and you want to get an abortion, any kind of harms that could be reduced by going through, a doctor in a hospital and the, legal channels, you lose all of that. As far as, speaking to a scenario where illicit drugs are legalized, what you have to remember is any illegal drug has a legal counterpart, right? So like opioid is a category of drugs. So like there's pharmaceutical heroin, all over the place. And even though in the United States, we don't have pharmaceutical heroin, heroin is an opioid. So like dilaudid morphine it's potent, so like these are, like Vicodin to Percocet to heroin to fentanyl is like, beer to wine to, vodka to grain alcohol or whatever. So these drugs are legal and regulated. There are legal regulated versions of them. The DEA restricts them, but that model like totally exists. I mean, people, I mentioned something about it's called I think Desin. It's this ADHD drug, right? And the ingredient is methamphetamine. So there is a legal regulated methamphetamine in the drugstore right now. So the idea that like meth is killing people all over the place, like legal meth is in your pharmacy right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a slightly different derivative, but yeah, you're right. They're amphetamines. So, I hear you.
Yeah. This PPT meth isn't really meth anymore anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, right. No, that's interesting. And I wanted to also so going back to, you were talking about a while back now in our conversation, you brought up Purdue. So yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts on this, because there's so much attention right now because this huge lawsuit settlement was just made, $4 billion, right? They've clearly already sheltered a lot of their money in trust funds, right? They declared bankruptcy. They're no longer affiliated with the company. But clearly they made out still very well, right? And most importantly, that they're also not convicted of any crimes, right? Or even being, arrested. Like there's like no process, right? So yeah, what are your thoughts? Like what, and is there even a focus, that needs to be made on Oxy as a, gateway or whatever, or as a pathway for opioid addiction, right? So yeah, what do you think?
I think it's an enormously complicated issue. And I think the thing about it is, look, what the Sacklers and Purdue did is reprehensible. There's no excuse for it. Like there's nothing good that you can say about it. It's gross. They deserve every medieval torture punishment imaginable. On the other side of the coin, what the hell is wrong with us that we didn't see this coming? This is a for-profit company. Opioids have been around for, since the dawn of time. They're addictive. We've known that. We've always known that. Doctors know that. So when these guys show up and they go, hey, we've got this opioid, it's not addictive. Like, why didn't somebody say, really? That's actually quite impossible. And the idea, like, I feel like, I'm very careful about how I say this out in the world, because I don't, I certainly don't condone what they did, and I'm not blaming anybody other than Purdue and the Sacklers, but we were primed for this crisis long before OxyContin showed up. If Purdue Pharma handed out shit sandwiches, this would not be a shit sandwich epidemic. I mean, I think we all know that, right? It's an instant gratification society. Depression and anxiety and suicide rates are skyrocketing. Opioids, they're painkillers. Supply meets demand. And so, like, compulsive use is a compulsion for pain relief. And I think since the Harrison Narcotic Act of 1914, when opioids became available by prescription for physical pain only, we have been getting further and further away from the idea that, before that, opioids were the default medication for every kind of pain, physical and emotional. You took opioids if you were anxious. You took opioids if you got shot. I mean, whatever it is. And so opiate receptors regulate physical pain and emotional pain. And so, they don't know if you have a prescription. They don't know what kind of pain you're trying to kill. Like that's just what they do. So like when I tell somebody, I used heroin to treat depression, they're like, oh my God, how is that possible? It's like, it works the exact same way as if I used heroin to treat back pain. So for the people who are prescribed OxyContin for, I had knee surgery and they gave me OxyContin or whatever, when your knee pain doesn't hurt anymore, right? Like I had knee surgery, they said the pain was only gonna last for 3 days. It's 6 months later, I'm still taking the OxyContin. Like, you're taking it because it feels good, because it's relieving some kind of pain. I mean, my mom had cancer twice. She was prescribed all kinds of, opioids. She didn't take them after the thing. after the pain ended. So if you're continuing to take it, it's because it's killing some kind of pain. And I feel like focusing on the Sacklers and OxyContin and Purdue, which again, they certainly deserve it, it kind of takes it makes it easier to focus on them instead of like, well, gee whiz, why did I continue to take it? Like maybe I'm depressed, instead of kind of looking at that. And it's a hard thing. Like I'm worried that I'm saying it all wrong right now. Like I really don't want this to come out wrong, but like, I feel like it makes it harder to kind of look at why was I doing that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I really hope that makes sense because I don't mean anything,
No, I think I understand what you mean. And kind of along the same lines, there was a question about, well, if there is really this underlying pain that's driving the use, then how do we address that underlying pain? Right? It's a very broad question, but some thoughts because from your book, definitely seen that you've tried different modalities or different avenues of getting there, right? So I guess what works for you.
I mean, I feel like everybody has something that they do to deal with pain. I mean, it's a coping mechanism. Like drugs are a coping mechanism, and everybody has whatever the thing is. I feel like we look at drugs differently. Like if I was running, if I was depressed and I was suicidal and like running, solved the same problem that heroin solved, I wouldn't have been sent to rehab for running, obviously. Nobody would have said running is the problem. So we look at again, as soon as drugs are involved, we look at it that way. We don't actually, we're not treating the pain. And as far as depression goes, antidepressants, I mean, I tried, every conceivable antidepressant, and something I want to say it's like either 49 or 50% of depressed adults are unresponsive to antidepressants, right? There's basically two kinds of antidepressants. And it's so hard to find good mental health help. Most people don't have resources or access. There's also the stigma. I mean, look, we know that you can't will away physical pain. I mean, you sprain your ankle, nobody's going like, snap out of that sprained ankle.
Right.
But everybody's been told to calm down and look at the bright side. And, what do you have to be so upset about? And all like that. So it's so much harder to deal with mental health issues. And so many people are suffering. And you look at these, the rural areas where it's that much harder and people aren't seeking help because they're ashamed. I mean, there's a bajillion reasons and barriers and whatever. And so, just saying no to drugs, like if you're desperately hurting and somebody shows up with a painkiller, you're going to just say no. I mean, so I feel like telling kids to just say no to drugs and, all of that stuff, like we've got to get in there and say, how are we actually going to treat this pain? Because it's pain. Pain is the gateway. Pain is the trigger. Like demand for painkillers will cease when our supply of pain is, gone. And until then, what can we do about that? I mean, there was all this, a study came out, I think it was, I forget which government agency, but it was like 95% of illicit opioid users have some kind of mental health disorder, right? Whether it's, depression, anxiety, trauma, whatever. Of that 95% in rehab, 97% are treated for addiction only.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we actually doing here? I mean, like really, what are we doing?
Right. I mean, well, it's again, that same issue. I think that addiction is treated in so many ways as an issue almost external to mental health, that it gets minimized as being just behavioral, right? Because so many of therapies are so behaviorally focused. And so you'll talk about like dual diagnosis, right? Or co-occurring disorders where there's a clear distinction made between, mental health issues, quote unquote mental health issues, and what addiction is seen to be. So I think that's a big part of why only the addiction gets treated, right? Because folks don't see it as part of the same treatment, or there becomes often this like moralizing, right? About like, what's the choice?
It's also, I mean, the other problem is it's been so siloed off from science and medicine for so long. I mean, these treatment programs, and I mean, I want to like put in a little disclaimer that like I really don't have a problem. I would never
Of
discourage
course.
anybody from
Right.
AA. Like if it works for you, do it. But it's
Yes.
not a medical organization. It's not based in science. And so, these programs, when medical experts without medical credentials push magical thinking cures, it's called quack medicine. Like that's the definition of quack medicine. If you aren't qualified to diagnose, treat, or monitor a medical condition, I mean, addiction is a medical condition. So you've got all of these rehabs where it's in 46 states. You don't even need a high school diploma in order to be a treatment counselor. There's no standard training. So, treatment is kind of all over the place. And we're treating addiction and sobriety and God. And like God has been out of the disease curing business since like the bubonic plague.
Yeah. And again, that it does work for some people, and whatever works, for you or for anyone is fair. Somebody else brought up this really interesting saddening number. So they say the rehab that they attended in LA for 30 days costed $52,700 before insurance, right? So, I mean, really the unaffordability of this. I mean, at the city level, many cities will have, I mean, not across the board, I should say, left-leaning cities will have coverage for at least like a 90-day, maybe perhaps 1 week detox, maybe IOP for a month, and outpatient for 3 months. It's not the greatest, but it's what at least some places will offer. So yeah, your thoughts on this, like the cost of treatment, right? Also the privatization of treatment into particular rehab facilities that, by nature end up catering to a particular socioeconomic strata, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the real, the big problem here is that medically assisted treatment, outpatient medically assisted treatment works, and it costs a fraction of,
right.
You're talking about 52 grand for a month of inpatient, whatever. I don't know what it is, but like I get, the most expensive month I've had on buprenorphine of like out of pocket, a la carte, everything was like, $1,200, all in, and that works. And so, medically assisted treatment, which we know is now the gold standard and it works, is offered in a third of rehabs. So most of them are, again, these faith and abstinence-based programs, but that's what we know. Like we look at, this is a college, right? I'm sure everybody in this class, decided to go to Fordham after extensive research, and you start thinking about it when you're a freshman in high school and all that. That's not how rehab went. But like, that's not how rehab works. Addiction is very reactive. It's like, oh my God, my kid's on drugs. Who are we going to call? Aunt Joe went to this place. That's where we're going. But so there's not all that research, and it's so fear-based. And these guys are telling parents, AA is the brand, it's been around since the 1930s. It works is their slogan. I mean, who's going to doubt that? And I feel like, it's really, I don't know, that like the stigma of Matt, you've got those, like if an average parent calls a rehab and says, I'm reading about this outpatient medically assisted treatment, and you guys are this AA-based program, like you guys are $52,000, but it seems like that's so much cheaper. I feel like there's a lot of kind of suspicion the way that like, when you go into, some store and there's something's out on, Ben and Jerry's is $1 a pint, like what's wrong with it, so there's kind of that suspicion. And when you've got, well, we're an AA-based facility, we, AA's the brand, like, there's a reason it costs $52,000. Why would you go with, you're not getting anything good out of it. Like, it's easy to talk you out of it. Here's an interesting.
Those are when you want to.
Yeah. Can he say the? Yes, he said the cost of 30 days in rehab is $52,000 in that case, but that's not uncommon. And there are lots and lots of families that are going into major debt to send their kids to one of these programs that do not work. Back to these JAMA studies of the contrast between treatment modalities. So buprenorphine and methadone, which is medically assisted treatment, is proven, this isn't my opinion, to reduce the risk of overdose, relapse, and death by up to 79%.
Yeah.
It will save your life, right? Going to a traditional 30-day inpatient faith and abstinence-based treatment program, no matter what it costs, will increase your risk of death in equally dramatic fashion, right? And it will increase your risk of death faster, because you hear all these stories about people get out of rehab and they die from overdose, or they get out of jail or whatever. When you have no tolerance, you're at the highest risk of death and of overdose. And when you're using illicit drugs, which is really all you can get these days, you're at the highest risk of death. So you go to rehab, you're one of the 95% who's actually a depressed person, but they treat you for the completely wrong thing. And so you're miserable, and you get out of there and you go, I just need some relief, like I'm desperate. I mean, people like that story is so common and so tragic, and it happens, all the time. So the middle of that, and I forget exactly when this JEMA study came out, but it's on JEMA if anybody's curious. Dr. Sarah Wakeman is one of the authors, and she's brilliant. So it's in the middle of the road here is if parents just get a bunch of Narcan and they say to their kid, look, please don't use alone. Here's a bunch of Narcan. They have a better chance of being alive in 6 months than going to rehab. So I've had this conversation with a lot of parents. And of course, what they hear is, you're telling me to tell my kid to use drugs? I'm not telling you to tell your kid to use drugs. I'm asking you if you want your kid to live or die, because here are your options. Like, these are the facts. It's not a question of like, well, that sounds crazy and it doesn't make sense to me. It's like, if you want your kid to have a better chance of being alive in 6 months, do one of these two things. If you don't, take out a giant loan and go to rehab. I mean, it's
Right.
that simple.
Well, there's a whole business to it, right? I mean, it's really making me think of, there's this brilliant ethnography by the previous professor of mine. His name is Robert Fairbanks. He wrote this ethnography on the recovery houses in Philly, and talks about really how, this sort of government subsidization of recovery houses creates this kind of partnership with the state, to sort of both create a business and also at the same time perpetuate poverty, right? So
Yes.
folks in the recovery house are typically on food stamps, welfare, right? Like the treatment lasts while you still receive those benefits. So there's this whole very twisted way in which it becomes, also a hand of the state, right? And its corruptive influence. I mean, I guess any thoughts on that? We're getting also close to time, and I want to give you a chance to read from your book. So maybe we should. Well, do you want to respond to that, or should we jump to the book?
I mean, I think it's like, these are for-profit businesses, so you can't really fault them for trying to make a dollar. However, addiction treatment is so siloed off from science and medicine. There's rehabs operate with very little oversight. There's no standard training. I mean, it's not in the medical thing at all. I just want to answer Eliza Zimmer's thing here. You're referring a lot to emotional pain and depression as a driver for opioid use. Do you think antidepressants should be included in MAT? That's a great question, because the inverse, in a way, is true. MAT is effective as an antidepressant, right? Methadone is a full opioid agonist. So it's basically, legal heroin, for lack of a better description. And buprenorphine, although it's different, it still, saturates your opiate receptors. It's like a warm blanket on your opiate receptors. So for me, a depressed person who's using heroin as an antidepressant, I don't need antidepressants in the MAT, because the MAT is the antidepressant. And when people are like, oh my God, what do you mean heroin works for antidepressants? It's like, of course it does. It kills pain. Depression is emotional pain. So you don't need, I'm actually, I think if we weren't in this like kind of opioid hysteria mode, I think we would be seeing a lot of studies about we should try buprenorphine for treatment-resistant depression.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
You're saying even for folks who maybe had not. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, and the thing about it is, people like the idea of like, well, but then they're going to become addicted to this thing. And it's like, if you take Zoloft and you need to take it every day for your depression, and you're going to take it for the rest of your life, Who cares? Then just take buprenorphine. Like there's no long-term, it's not like you're going to start stealing VCRs if you take buprenorphine every day. Like it's not a side effect,
Yeah. Huh. That's very interesting. Is there any research on that? I haven't heard anything about that.
There are a couple of off-label studies, and it's funny because like I've read a couple of them, and they always end with like, it's amazing that this works, but like we have no idea why it is. And it's like what are you, a moron? Like opiate receptors, like I mean, it works for the same reason that it's going to make your sprained ankle feel better. Like
right.
These drugs, like we don't rub opioids on your knee like an ice pack. The pain is in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, I have been hearing more about emerging research on microdosing. I feel like there's a lot of interest in that right now with psilocybin or I mean, mostly with psilocybin, LSD, sometimes around MDMA, but
there's a lot.
Right.
I've been approached by a few. I mean, anybody who read my book is aware, if you might remember, that I'm terrified of hallucinogens. I've never taken a hallucinogen in my life, so I still haven't. But a bunch of ketamine clinics have approached me lately with like, why don't you try our ketamine, microdosing, blah 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 program? And it scares the shit out of me. But I'm hearing really good things about it, and the same with psilocybin.
Right, especially for treatment of trauma. So I think it's interesting stuff. Yeah. Okay, I want to hear you read, so let's give some time for that.
I don't know how to read.
Yeah, the floor is yours.
Chapter 5. The window is narrow and rectangular, the kind you crank open, except the crank is gone. Ice on the screen partially obscures the view of a snow-covered field with random footprints and a wall of pine trees. I exhale onto the glass, draw a smiley face in the condensation, and watch it evaporate. Knock, knock, Pete says, rapping where the door should be. He slides a brown plastic cafeteria tray onto the dresser and leaves without saying another word. 3 slimy slices of turkey with some sort of gelatinous goo on the ends. On white bread, a small packet of mustard, and 2 slightly larger packets of ketchup. No sides. I don't eat anything. As the sun sets, I lie down on the small bed. Headlights sweep across the ceiling and remind me of the nights when my father tucked me in at my mom's house. After he left my room, I'd stare at the ceiling until his headlights appeared. Then I'd run to the window and watch him do tricks, his term for veering off our long driveway onto the lawn and peeling donuts and figure eights. I'd brag about the show to my friends. This is why it's great to have divorced parents. 2 years ago, when Mom sold the house, there were still patches of lawn where grass didn't grow. No one I know has been to rehab. It's all prayer and religious. Is it all prayer and religious mumbo jumbo? Maybe some of it. The therapy is probably more like the weekly sessions Mom started taking me to when I was 5, after the divorce. Fuck, what if she makes me stay here after all? I overheard her tell one of my psychiatrists that I was devoid of feelings. She was wrong. I felt everything. She used to ask constantly, why are you so sad? Or don't you want to be happy? I didn't want to be sad, but I didn't know why I was sad or how not to be sad or how to talk about it. I was broken. I felt broken. My body ached, my stomach hurt, I couldn't sleep, nothing was pleasurable. Every morning I woke up knowing I'd failed before my feet hit the ground. At night, I'd lie in bed and wish for a terminal disease. Mom would pull my shoulders back and say, body language speaks volumes about how you feel about yourself. Well, I'm not sitting up straight at all. Sorry. And she'd say something similar when I failed to make eye contact during a conversation or didn't ooze with confidence. Someday, David, I hope it'll be important enough for you to decide to be happy. Though I kept my shittiest feelings inside, even in therapy, 3 different shrinks diagnosed me with clinical depression by the age of 16. Their scientific explanations called for chemical solutions, but Prozac made me more depressed. Zoloft made it impossible for me to sleep, not terrible, or get an erection, not acceptable. Prozac made me sweaty and confused. I knew what I needed. I'd known since the drug prevention assembly in 5th grade. The cop said cocaine makes you angry, pot makes you stupid, and if you drank alcohol, you weren't allowed to drive. Heroin is the worst drug, he said, and then lowered his voice to an ominous whisper. It's a painkiller so powerful, it makes you not feel anything. That sounded perfect to me. The last thing I needed was anger or an impediment to fulfilling my lifelong dream of driving into a tree at top speed. The idea of heroin gave me hope. Hold on. Sorry. From the beginning of high school, all other substances were readily available and liberally consumed by my friends, who used weed and booze like an essential garnish for activities. Peer pressure was rampant with hallucinogens and cocaine. I experimented and hated the effects. Reality wasn't the problem, I was. But I had no access to heroin. It might as well have been plutonium in my slice of suburbia. The bright hall light shines into my dark room, and a peculiar wet dog and corn chip smell fills the air. It's eerily quiet and I'm restless. I get up and pace the small room. Rob doesn't know where I am. I couldn't call him or go by the apartment before I left. Will I ever see him again? Probably not. When we first met during the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, Rob looked nothing like the junkie stereotype in his pleated khakis and polo shirt, his short hair and neatly combed and parted to the side. He was 7 years older than me, close with my friend Andrew's older brother, and supposedly with Michael Alec, leader of the club kids. I'd seen them on talk shows. The self-proclaimed freaks and outcasts struck a chord. The night Rob took me to Michael's Disco 2000 party at Limelight, we skipped to the front of a line that stretched down the block and around the corner, and we got in without having to pay or show ID. Rob introduced me to Michael, and I started hanging out with both of them and going to the clubs at least once a week. It was easy to lose myself in the dark rooms and loud techno music. Soon after I told Michael I could attract rich, thirsty suburban kids to Limelight, USA and Tunnel, he hired me as a promoter. It didn't matter that I wasn't old enough to enter a nightclub. The club kids drank and used cocaine, ecstasy, and Special K, but they shunned heroin. When I found out Rob used heroin and asked for a hit, he said, "I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy." He resisted for months, but I persisted. He finally caved at the end of an all-nighter at Save the Robot, an after-hours club. I was 16 in the passenger seat of his grandmother's Chevy Celebrity, choking back tears as I told him about my struggle with depression. "Please," I said, "this has been going on since I was a kid, but lately I think about suicide all the time." My heart raced as Rob shook an infinitesimal amount of rough beige powder onto the back of a magazine. I snorted it with a rolled up $5 bill. As the bitter mix of heroin and coagulated snot dripped down the back of my throat, my body started to relax, and years of bottled up shame, sadness, anger, and fear melted into the warmth and safety. I wasn't high, I was even. I could breathe for the first time. The next morning, all I could think about was getting more.
That was great. Thank you. I think for folks who have not, yet read it, I'm sure will be inspired to check it out. I by no means got to even probably like a quarter of the questions, so I apologize if we didn't get to yours, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. We're a little bit over time. So I just want to thank you, David, for taking the time to do this. This was great. I think my students will get a lot out of this. And best of luck on your book. It's a beautiful read, and it's already a success. So congratulations.
Thank you.